are Science of Teaching Reading Competencies 1 and 2. We spent the first bit just overviewing what both of these exams look like, and now the last bit of our time together will be focused in on specific information to Science of Teaching Reading, looking at the first two competencies. Like we talked about, we're breaking them down each session. So, okay, a little motivation, because I got to do it every time. You create your luck by working for what you want. And so obviously you're not just going to go in and take your test and say, hopefully I'll get lucky and pass it today. What you're going to say is, I've been working, I've done so many things, I made a plan, I followed it, I stuck to it, and I worked at it, and I am now prepared and I will be successful. So just a little pep talk as we move forward to this part. You're doing what you need to do in order to be prepared, guys. So I'm proud of you for that and impressed with your efforts, and I know they will pay off as we move forward. I'm going to keep on doing that. I'm going to be a motivating voice throughout this semester, whether it's in classes or in our sessions here, because I know there's anxiety around not only your exams, but many other things in life right now. So you're going to be getting positive energy coming from me, and all of the support and, warm wishes that you can get when it comes to needing help with this and feeling supported. So now let's look here. What we have are reading. This is breaking down the Science of Teaching Reading parts. So there's 4 different parts of this exam. And what we're looking at today is the piece that's in red, and it encompasses the reading pedagogy piece and 2 different competencies. But what we learned about this piece of the test is that it represents 13% of the full test. And so that's about 12 questions when you break that down mathematically, which I had to do with a calculator. So looking a little closer, a little different way of looking more closely at that domain 1 that is in red up there. What we know is with all of our exams, there's different domains. And within the domains, there's different competencies that encompass that domain area. And then they break it down even further by giving you descriptive statements that accompany each domain, each competency, so that you can it really breaks down, here's exactly what I need to prepare for in order to be prepared for this competency. And so in this one domain, you have your competency of the Science of Teaching, the foundations of the Science of Teaching Reading, and there are several descriptive statements that you will be looking at that you want to break down and study in order to feel that you're prepared for this one. The second competency, Foundations of Reading Assessment, has several statements as well to break down, and we're going to be looking at some of them, but not as many as the first one, as you see. But one thing that I keep in mind as I'm looking at this is that's a lot of statements, a lot of things to prepare for 13% of the test. So it's not necessarily, let's not spend time on this, let's not worry about it, but it's also, let's recognize, like, man, what's coming up is really going to be a bigger chunk that we want to spend more time on. And that's where I'm saying, I'm going to do some small group work. We're going to have different ways of studying these things, and it won't all be in one session, because that is where we need to focus, right? But we're still focusing here. Let's get these 12 questions correct, so, where there's not as much weighing on that bigger piece there if you need to. So with that in mind, again, we're focusing in on these 2 today. And so what we want to look at is exactly what does this domain encompass. And so if you're thinking of like a big umbrella, this would be the big umbrella part. And then the other areas come underneath that to help us recognize this, to help us learn more about the full reading pedagogy domain. Excuse me. So what is stated is what for the expectation of this domain is that teachers demonstrate understanding of the principles of reading instruction and assessment. and use a range of instructional strategies and assessment methods to promote students' development of foundational reading skills. So a lot there to unpack, but what we think about is really what pieces of that are key and what part, and from there, we think about, okay, when we say principles of reading instruction, that has to do with that first competency. When we say assessment, that has to do with that second competency. And so you see how it's all encompassing in this statement, and then the competencies break it down further. This is where you can take this link and access your own. And so that's what we're going to do now, guys. If you want, like, again, it's hard to see in this slide, but you have access to them to look more closely at them yourself. But the first thing I want to do is just point a couple of things out that I want you to be aware of. And again, this might be helpful as you look across your different content area competencies. Each of these statements begin with kind of the verb. What is the action that you are taking within this statement to show understanding of it? So here, we're going to demonstrate knowledge on this first statement. On the next one, again, demonstrate knowledge. And on C, you see it says apply knowledge. And then demonstrate again. And on E, it's recognize. And so that is one thing that as I was looking across all of the different competencies laid out in front of me, I just started highlighting, okay, that's basically the range of what is stated at the beginning of every statement. There might be a couple of others, but it's either demonstrate, apply, or recognize. And it made me think, like, are they giving us a hint right there as to what we're expected to understand for that descriptive statement? And maybe if you look closer at that, we think, okay, if it's saying apply, just as in the definition, then we're expected to really show some kind of practical use of whatever that statement is telling us to do. So maybe that question is going to be a more practical type question, as opposed to one that says recognize, where maybe those are just identifying something. And that's where it might be flat out, if I know this vocabulary word and the definition and I can identify it, then I can check that one off the list. And it might help you, again, to prioritize. I see that applying and demonstrating have to do with more practical explanation. I see that recognizing is just identifying. And, so maybe this isn't as important as I'm putting on, as I'm sharing with you right now, but I think that as you pull apart these statements, you start noticing things like that. And then as you look at practice questions and do more preparation, you start seeing like, okay, I do see that there seems to be more emphasis on the areas where they're telling us to apply knowledge as opposed to where they're telling us to recognize it. So that's just something I wanted to point out here at the beginning, because that might impact the way that you engage with some of the descriptive statements. Recognizing might be more studying definitions as opposed to applying, where now we think about what exactly does that look like in the classroom? How can I demonstrate that I understand that statement? So now what I've done, and what I'll do often in our sessions, is just where I'll look at the competency and see what is the statement, and then we will pull out a few of the descriptive statements to talk about. Obviously, we can't talk about all of them. And so when we're looking at the foundations, it's really all about, what are the underlying concepts that are related to the best practices. And so when we're looking at the competency statement, it has to do with what are all the building blocks, the starting pieces when it comes to teaching reading. And so again, hopefully this is not unfair, especially if you're further along in our program. So when I'm, this is a purpose for the binder, guys, that you're looking at the competencies and you highlight what terms stand out for you in this competency that really state what needs to be done in order to understand it. And for me, I highlighted foundational concepts, principles, best practices, because I need to understand those big pieces in order to say, I feel good about this area. And so you do that same thing, looking at each of the competencies and highlighting. So what you see on your screen is what will be in your different competencies. And so this, like I said, I'm pulling out a couple of different examples for you to look at. And so one of them being the very first descriptive statement in competency 1 tells you that you need to demonstrate knowledge. So that's telling you again, showing some kind of maybe a practical question that shows that you understand these key concepts that show that are research-based, essential roles, all of this that you might expect to be asked questions asking you what this looks like in the classroom. And so again, I highlighted things that stood out for me in your own binder or on your own sheets. It might be something totally different that you highlight, and that impacts what you study from there. But for me, and this has to do with maybe a lot of you think the same way, like, oh, wow, I remember this from our classes, that we've talked about this in our reading classes. And so that stands out for me. And it helps me think about this piece of artwork that Dr. Rodriguez made, which keeps on coming around for many of you. I keep on bringing it out as a way of showing you this visual of the way that we develop, as a way of illustrating the literacy skills that are highlighted in the National Reading Panel that you're expected to include in reading instruction. So in our classes together, many of you have made your own illustrations. This is an example of mine to show you the way that phonological awareness is the foundation. Oral language, oh, if you can't tell, this is my hot air balloon illustration to depict this process. So the basket of the hot air balloon is the bottom part. We cannot move forward. You know, there's nowhere to sit as a student if we don't have those initial skills understood, the phonological awareness piece. And then what holds together the full reading and writing skills is the phonemic awareness piece of phonological awareness and the phonics development. So without having these areas fully together, we cannot make that connection to these different skills that we need to have: comprehension, fluency, spelling, vocabulary. And the fire of the hot air balloon, which is this piece here in case you didn't know, is the oral language, because guys, without oral language, we can't get off the ground. So that's really the fuel that makes everything else go. And so this visual here, I hope will pop up into your heads when you see questions about, you know, the development and what needs to come first and what is the base and what helps everything to move forward. You know, really thinking about this visual or your own, because many of you are creating your own at this time. And so again, personally, that's one thing that helps me is when I'm looking at something and I can make some kind of illustration connection to it. And so I'll share some of those resources with you, and you can decide whether or not that's the most effective way for you to practice that. And so again, this might be something, a visual or your own, that you print out and it goes in your binder behind competency 1, because you can see that this is going to be a resource for studying. And as we move forward in our series, we might look back at this and say, okay, now we're talking about the basket part of the process, and we'll delve in deeper, you know, when we're looking at those pieces of those competencies. So this will be something that we come back to, because each of these areas has a lot of different components involved with it in order to make students successful in those areas. So we have to break them down, and that's what we're doing in class. That's what we'll do here. And hopefully having that overlap and hearing it in multiple ways is going to be very helpful. So another descriptive statement there in this competency, again, apply knowledge. And here's something that you're hearing from the very earliest of courses, this interconnected nature of listening, speaking, reading, writing, and thinking. It is integrated where all of those work together, and it is recursive in that it just is a continual process. And so keeping that in mind is going to help you to feel more comfortable with this area. But within each of these areas, there's things that you want to remember and keep in mind that helps the students to really be able to fully integrate those skills and for it to be a continual cycle of learning. And so this next visual that I'm providing, again, it's small, but it's going to be where you can print it out and look at it more closely. But I like it because it provides, it's like a breakdown of a lot of the glossary terms, a lot of the things that you need to know for this, this competency area, and gives you further description. And what it's really doing is showing you, look at all these things that need to be working together dynamically for a successful student to engage in peer learning, whether it's with one peer or a small group, or to independently, take on new learning. And so this has to do with these different language levels that we're going to be talking about and that you need to be aware of for this competency area. So again, another visual that you might look at and highlight and further study when it comes to preparing for this area. Another statement for the foundational understandings competency is about RTI. Hopefully this is where many of you say, okay, I got this. I'm familiar with RTI and the different tiers and how it works within a classroom. And again, it's saying we need to demonstrate knowledge there. And so maybe it will show some examples of different students and where would they be placed among those tiers. And so you want to think about what pieces of this statement do you need further study in, and what part of it already makes a lot of sense, again, based on your courses and what you already understand. And another helpful visual where we're looking at this and, something that helps me, and again, might or might not help you. I'm printing out these visuals, putting them in my binder, and as you're thumbing through, you keep seeing them. They keep coming through as you're looking, and hopefully that's what you pull up when you're there and taking the actual exam. And you think about what happens at the very beginning of RTI, what happens at the second step, and what happens in the third step. And so what we know, what you hopefully have already understood at this point, is that the beginning step when it comes to response to intervention is just good classroom instruction. It's what's happening in the classroom before anything else comes in. And within that classroom instruction, you're doing the assessments necessary, and possibly you identify a need for this student that requires them to move into tier 2, which means now I'm giving you a little more specific instruction in my classroom in the form of small group instruction. And so those students might be moved into tier 2. Within that work that you're doing with students in small groups, you might recognize that some are still not able to accelerate as needed. And so they are recommended to move into tier 3. And that's when further intervention takes place, where now they might have IEP put in place and they're working with specialists at different times based on the different needs. And so understanding that helps us to know what's taking place in each of these levels. I'm not going to read through all of this, but just considering it a resource to further explain what I just talked about in the visual. This statement stood out for me as I was looking, because there are so many, I didn't highlight these vocabulary words, but there's so many within this one statement that I think, man, we need to look at this closer and make sure that we feel comfortable with what these are and how they look in terms of how they play a role in language system and oral language, in your language systems and oral language. And so again, these are things we're going to be talking about in our reading classes, and you will be hearing about them. And so what you're wanting to do is, you know, integrate the work that we do in our classes around these things along with the studying that we're doing in our sessions together. So a nice visual that it integrates those different levels that were just talked about in that statement. It really helps you to see, again, thinking about oral language, it's complex. There's a lot of pieces to it. And all of these pieces then relate to the success that the student will have in reading and writing. So understanding these different areas is what helps us to break down saying, this is where students are stronger and this is where they need more instruction. And so another visual that helps us to see the different levels. And as we move forward, both in class and in these sessions, you will engage more deeply in each of these areas because they come out again as we talk about the development in terms of phonological awareness and all those different areas. So for this competency, they're just asking that you understand that there's these levels, and later on, they're going to ask you to do more work around what is involved within each of those levels. So again, maybe print this off and put it behind competency 1 as a way of helping you work on descriptive statement Q. And more resources. This actually gives you the definitions of the things that are in this visual. So nothing that I'm going to read for you, but good examples are included along with the definitions of each of those terms. But you have these resources, and like I said, I'm overviewing for you, going through some pieces, but also providing the resources for you to take time to work on later on and look at more closely. So a couple of practice questions, guys, as we get a little further along. Just you can either put your answer into the chat box or just write it down. And hopefully you're looking at my screen and not your own. But just a couple of practice questions that encompass this competency statement, these competency statements that we've worked on. So just giving you a couple of seconds to practice if you want to. Some of you can put your answers in there or just look and see if you know what it would be. So this first one, phonemic awareness, falls under phonological awareness, the ability to recognize sounds within words. So that's going to help you just with, at the very beginning, we looked at that first statement that was applying to. A little more explanation. Phonological awareness involves multiple components. We're going to be talking about this, but phonemic awareness is one piece of it. So next question, which of the following is important when planning reading lessons for students? It should say maybe which is most important. So you're not putting it in the chat box, I see. You're trying to do these on your own. What's most important? Determining a purpose for instruction, because once you determine the purpose, everything else falls into place in terms of the text that you will be using, the strategies that support that purpose, you know, what's most needed in order to move forward with instruction, and of course, aligning that with your standards. In the first tier of RTI, the goal is for do you know? Hopefully you're working hard. You're not throwing it out there in the chat box, but see, oh, thank you. Thank you. I see one guess there. In the first tier is where That's where students are just in the classroom. They're sitting in there with you all, and as the classroom teacher, you're giving them the best instruction possible before moving them up to the second tier if needed for more intervention. And the second tier is still you in the classroom as well, by the way. It's just small group instruction. Oh, and there's that to help you remember. This was mentioned as one of the definitions that you needed to be aware of in this category, in this section. So does anybody know the strategy to determine or infer the meanings of words using prefixes, suffixes, roots, etc.? A root word is the base of a word after all affixes are removed. So that would be your morphemic analysis, guys. The morphemes are the prefixes, the things that are added to words, to base words that change the meaning of them. So from child, the base word, the morpheme would be the children, turn it into children, or from adding an S to the end, the morpheme is the S. So that kind of work around those things is morphemic analysis. Okay, so let's take a little bit of time. I know we're getting close to the end, but that's okay because I'm going to show you that our Competency 2 Foundations of Reading assessment work is really focusing on reading assessment. And when you look at the competencies there, and I'm going to look over real quick. I clicked on that to take me over to my competencies, looking down to the second ones. When I'm reading through these, and I hope when you're reading through these, again, depending on where you are in the program, but if you're a little further along, I hope that many of you are saying, oh, good, I know these. I have engaged in many different activities and projects around the importance of reading assessment, and I can do these different things that help me to show that I understand the importance of reading assessment. And so as I was preparing this section for today, it was almost like a breath of fresh air, like, oh, good, we've done this. This is not brand new. These are things that we're going to pull out at different points in our reading classes, or that you might remember that we've already done. So again, that I'm saying that to kind of help you, like Competency 2 is not brand new. These are things that we have done and that you hopefully have connections to. So pulling out a few of those descriptive statements, not many, I just want you to see that, you know, what they're asking you to do is understand the role of assessment in your instruction, specifically your reading instruction, and how you're using that data to go from planning to help you plan lessons. And I hope that for many of you, this helps you to think about, well, back in EDRE 4450, I worked with a student. I used that data to help me plan a lesson that showed me what I needed to do with them based on what the assessment said. So if you haven't done this yet, you will be doing that and you'll have this connection. As I looked at the next statement, you know, a couple of these terms stood out for me again, because this is vocabulary words. If I know the definition, then it helps me to put it into practical use. It helps me to say, somebody needs to mute, but maybe somebody's telling me how tired they are right now. They need a nap. We're getting close. What I highlighted were a couple of vocabulary terms that I wanted to make sure that we pointed out, because again, we've done these. We've done formative assessments. These are the types of assessments that form your instruction, a nice little tie-in to help you remember. And that, for example, you did running records. Studying those running records, studying students' writing samples help us to form the lessons that we're going to do with them. And so those are assessments that help us to plan instruction. Those are the ones that we need in our classrooms in order to say that we're hitting the target on what our kids need. Progress monitoring, it says that you want to have these ongoing assessments given throughout a lesson or unit. And this is how, when we're teaching a lesson, we're doing different things to make sure that they're getting it along the way. And I pulled in this nice quote that just helps us to think about how they're used in the classroom. where ongoing assessments they're talking about has less to do with written reports and more to do with the interaction really between teachers and learners. And so what those assessments might look like is questioning, observational notes, really looking at what's going on throughout the time that I'm teaching and how am I facilitating that learning to the next level in order to really meet my objectives on whatever the lesson is. And so we want to be aware of that we're monitoring along the way. The last assessment that was discussed there was the summative kind of assessments. We've talked about these as well. These are the types of assessments that don't form the instruction. They don't tell us what we need to teach. They sum up how we taught. They sum up how much the students got the information that we were trying to convey. And so an example of that is a Chapter 7 test. Now we've covered Chapter 7, and Friday you have a test over it, and that's going to tell me how you did, and hopefully it will impact if I move forward with reteaching or if I'm ready to move on to my next objective. STAR exam is a type of summative assessment because it's done at the end of the year to say where students are at that point in the year, understanding the concepts expected for that school year. So I'll just point out a couple of others. Remember that these resources are available for you to review independently. But really on this one, I just wanted to pull them all out because I kept saying, we know this, we've done this. And hopefully that feels good to see that this is familiar. When we're talking about those different types of text that we need to know the different students' reading levels, hopefully that makes us think about running records and how we identified the three different levels of text, instructional, frustrational, and independent levels based on what their scores were in the accuracy piece. So again, the important part is for you to be making these connections. When you read this, it's not to say, what is that? I don't know what any of that is. It's really to think back and reflect on what we've already done in class, what's coming up in class, and to say like, yes, that's familiar. I've done that. I know what that means. So a couple of practices here as we wrap up. So the ability to read a text and understand its meaning. So Jessie read the book and was able to explain to me why the character lied in Chapter 3. What skill is that showing us? What area? Shows that he has reading comprehension. He inferred that this character, why he lied. Which one of these is most appropriate when a teacher is questioning about concepts of print? Again, hopefully that's familiar to you. You've done a concepts of print assessment, or you will be doing it. What's most appropriate? Can you show me where to start reading? Concepts of print have to do with how students understand about the way that books work. And while that's what it says in C, we need more specific questions to check if they understand that. Which one of these would be most appropriate for high frequency irregular sight words? So these are words that come up often. And so we will not be able to, we won't be able to decode them. We're just expected to know them quickly. They're sight words. Which one of those would fit under those? Have, mother, and been, irregular sight words. I had a lot of these questions because I'm like, they're going to know these. A second grade teacher conducts reading interest surveys regularly. What would be the, why would you do that? What would that help you with? To be conducting reading interest surveys would help us to know what books I want students to be picking out, to encourage students to pick out books during their independent reading time. If I know what their interests are, I'm going to know what motivates them, and I'm going to be able to guide them in the right direction when it comes to that reading time so that they're really engaged during that time. And that fits under the motivation piece that we need to understand for this area. So which of these is semantic information? Thinking about what is semantics, back to our running record. Is it meaning, structure, or visual information that semantics fits under? That fits under the meaning piece. So if they look at the word tiger and they can say, oh, I know a tiger might refer to a person or an animal, I know different meanings of that word, then they're telling you they know the semantic information. Okay, guys, so in the couple of minutes that I have to wrap up, I want to show you the resources that I'm going to make available for you. And one of them is a chart like this. Again, not required, but you might decide to do something like this as you're reviewing the competencies. What are breaking down the statements? And as I look at those statements, here are some things that I already know about them. Here's some things I want to review. And here's some connections I have. So I did an example of ways that you've already worked with descriptive statement 1 back in competency 1, where it talked about the different areas of literacy skills. Again, your other study resource, I pulled this in again, is your test prep binder. That's where you're including things that you need, adding glossary terms, highlighting. We'll look at that together throughout our sessions. Again, not required. None of these things are. It's just options for you and ways that I'm encouraging you to delve deeper into the material. So now, guys, as we're wrapping up, I want to make sure that you have access. You know, you have access to all of this information over in this Google Drive folder. Here you will find this PowerPoint that we just did together. You will find a lot of different resources, the connections chart, different things that you can use access to help you further study, including practice quizzes, vocabulary, flashcards, all of those things that are available under the Competency 1 and 2 folder that it comes from this link. And now, guys, as we wrap up, even though I didn't leave as much time at the end as I wanted to, please go to this attendance link and fill out this page for me. If you're on Canvas, you see it there on Canvas. If you just have access through the Google Drive, it's also here in the Google Drive for attendance. Let me see, where is it? There it is. So you can access it there to type onto. If you have access on Canvas, please submit it there. If you don't, please email it to me. Okay, and you'll do this whether you listen to the live session or the recorded session, because that's going to be where I'm able to give you credit for the attendance for this session. This last slide has all the different links to those Google Drives, probably more than you need, because I think some of them take you to the same place, but this way you have them all in one place. They are also going to be on the Canvas course if you have access to that. And then what you see here are the Kahoot games that align with this competency. Even though we didn't have time to play them together today, I want you to go to the link and play them on your own and access your own score sheets and do them again and again as a way of practicing the concepts needed for these competencies. And guys, that is what I have for you today, just 1 minute late. So I feel like taking a bow because I kept close to time without, although we didn't get a chance to hit the Kahoot links like I wanted to. So I'm wrapping up now, but I'm also going to be sitting here looking through my chat questions, responding back if there's anything that was lacking there as if you shot out questions to me. But right now, if you could please complete your attendance for me and submit that. And we will definitely be in touch. Thank you so much for your attention today and your participation without talking. And I hope that you found this useful, and I hope to keep seeing you on the weeks to come. And just be in touch as needed, guys, whether it's through our classes together or just emailing me if we don't see each other week to week. So we're moving forward. Have a great rest of your day and weekend, and we will keep being in touch and hope to see a lot of you next Friday again. Thanks, guys, and jump in now. I'm just hanging out as we're finishing up. So jump off if you're done, or jump in if you wanted anything else.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. This was really awesome and a lot of information for students. I think the thing I want to remind students is please look at your schedule, because some of you will begin your next session at 12:05 and some of you begin your next session at 12:30. So please look at your schedule and govern yourselves accordingly. And we want together to say thank you to Dr. Rodriguez, because this was a lot